Hi, my name is Dhruv Gupta of Team FTC 13380, the Quantum Stingers, and today I'll be going over the season and tournament structure. We'll be talking about what a season is like and what your typical tournaments are like, both your in-person tournaments and your online tournaments. So with that, let's get started. Firstly is a season timeline. The season officially gets started with the challenge release, which is around the third week of September. Um, from when I'm recording it, it's only a couple days away, actually. It's followed by qualifiers and championship events in your region, and the season ends with the World Festival, which is usually held in April. Unofficially, First Tech Challenge is an year-long commitment. FTC teams keep working on their outreach activities and improving themselves all throughout the year. Most of the teams also work on acquiring new skills for their team members, like CAD, programming, and others during the off season. Now, here is an official season timeline, which first puts out, which helps better sort of explain these concepts. So registration opens in May, though you don't have to register your team in May. You can register much later in the year as well. And from May to August is your typical preseason. So preseason, also commonly referred to as off season, is the time when teams aren't competing in any official first competitions, but they are still working on improving themselves. Now, there's a variety of ways you could do this. For example, there's many unofficial competitions which are hosted usually by either first alumni or universities, etc., or organizations through which teams can hone their skills with building, with CAD, with programming. Teams can also conduct lots of outreach activities during the preseason. We found that conducting outreach during the preseason is a very effective way of getting lots of outreach done while also not putting too much stress on yourself to work on outreach during the real season. So the preseason is an important time and you shouldn't waste it either. In September, you have your kickoff and the start of the build and practice season. The kickoff is when the challenge is released, when we start receiving all of our maths, all of our challenge materials for the year. And it's when teams really get started going with the season. And we'll talk about the kickoff a little bit more on the next slide. From September to around January is your build and practice season. This is when you're uh, heavy into the building of the robot, into fine tuning. You're working on prototyping, you're working through the design process, and you're doing lots of practice as well. This practice can be through qualifier tournaments, through scrimmages that you set up with other teams, or it can just be like drivers practicing at your own home, getting all of that set up. Depending on the region, the qualifying season can be at different times. In some regions, it may start around late October. In many regions, it starts around mid to late November. And it also goes on to different lengths depending on the region you're in. In some regions, it'll end around mid-January, while in some regions, it'll keep on going until mid-February. But this is when you can go to your qualifier tournaments, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to the tournament structure of FTC. Then your state and regional championships. Again, there's lots of variance. It depends on when your qualifying season ends in your region. They can happen anytime between December and March. And then generally, you'll have your world championships in April. Now let's talk about the challenge release, also known as the kickoff. After the challenge for a year is released, teams decide upon their first general design and get to work prototyping. So for the last couple of weeks of September, teams can do things including creating a wooden or cardboard model of specific mechanisms on your robot. So for example, if you're planning on having a catapult-like device, you might create a wooden catapult, which just uses a motor and some wooden beams to try it out, see what works on it, if you need longer catapult arms, if you need a stronger motor, etc. So you'll get some of the specifications for you to use on your actual robot. You can start creating a CAD model of your robot as a whole. So you can look into things like which vendor you want to use, whether you want to buy parts from GoBuilda or if you want to buy parts from Tetrix, for example. Uh, you'll look into exploring different technologies and mechanisms for the year. So a couple of years ago, you had to lift your robot off the ground, and a mechanism which really stood out for that was the lead screw, which allows for a great amount of torque with not much speed. So you might look into new technologies that you haven't used before and see what their potential pros are and what their potential drawbacks are. You'll learn about and practice new programming concepts or vision technologies as well. So maybe your team wants to implement odometry this year, or maybe they want to look into using Vuforia instead of TensorFlow. That's one of the things that you'll also do based on the challenge so you can weigh things better. An important point to remember here is to clearly define your goals, clearly define what it is you're trying to get done. Before you start building the prototypes for any part on your robot, you need to define your design requirements. If we go back to the catapult example from earlier, you need to define how far your catapult needs to be able to throw. You need to define how its size, you need to see like how much space it can take up on the robot. You need to define how many motors it's going to use. There's lots and lots of specifications, and you need to make sure you have them all down. Now, while your prototypes might not fulfill every design requirement, your final model needs to. And your prototypes will give you a good idea of whether or not you'll be able to fulfill those design requirements. And when working with new programming systems, you need to know what you're going to be using them for. You can't just set up Vuforia on a camera and just wave it around. You need to know that you're going to be using Vuforia to track your position relative to the images on the wall, or you're going to be using Vuforia to detect a type of game material. So make sure that you have that down as well. After kickoff is the build and practice season. Over the next 2 to 3 months, teams focus on improving their designs as well as continuing or starting outreach activities. During this time, teams might cycle through 3 to 4 prototypes of robot designs until they find one which really fits all of the design criteria laid out at the beginning of the season, which they're able to build with relative ease and which is consistent and effective. They'll work on the programming for the autonomous section. And they'll also have to select drivers and have their drivers practice for the teleop section. One other thing that teams may do, but teams don't have to do, is collaborate with other local FTC teams to organize scrimmages where they can test their robot. So a scrimmage is when 2 to 4 teams get together in one FTC map and run their programs, practice working collaboratively, and learn from the other teams. You'll also, during this period, work on creating a strategy, both for autonomous and teleop. You'll need to be able to know what parts of autonomous you can do, how consistently you can do them, and what you can score on teleop. And this becomes really important during your tournaments. Near the end of the official build and practice season, teams will be able to register for and attend qualifier tournaments. And throughout the qualifier season, teams can continue working on improving their robot. Once like qualifiers start, that doesn't mean that your robot is stalled as it is. Throughout the season, right up until April, if you're qualified to Worlds, you'll be improving your robot. Now let's talk about the tournament structure and describe what these qualifiers are that you've heard so much about. There's 2 routes to the World Festival and First Tech Challenge based upon the region you're in. Firstly, it could be state qualifier to state championship to world championship, or in smaller and more direct regions, it could be state championship to world championship. Now, beginning with qualifier tournaments. In regions which have qualifiers, each team can attend up to 3 of these smaller qualifying tournaments, which are usually between 16 and 28 teams. At these qualifier tournaments, every team will get the chance to go through prelims um, with their robot. So they'll go through 5 robot rounds, and then afterwards, they'll have the semifinals and the finals, just as you would have at state championships or worlds. Of these 16 to 28 teams, anywhere between 3 to 5 teams, depending on the region you're in, and the qualifier size will qualify to the state championship. So the state championship is a bit of a larger affair. It has the best teams from every region, and there'll be one state championship per region. From that state championship, or based on the region, around 2 to 3 teams, or in some regions, up to 7 teams will qualify for the World Championship. Now let's go over the structure for a typical in-person tournament. The first thing you do in the morning is robot and field inspection. So in First Tech Challenge, there's a series of rules which your robot must abide by. Some of the most common being the robot cannot be larger than 18 inches by 18 inches by 18 inches, and the robot cannot have any loose parts on it, any water parts on it. It can't damage the field in any way. So the robot and field inspection will just make sure that you've abided by all of these rules. Now, if your robot does fail the robot inspection, say that you're maybe like 18.5 inches in height, then you will still have time during the robot and field inspection period to make those changes and go again and get your robot inspected again. Now, at the same time, there will also be team judging. So team judging is a 10 to 15-minute interview that happens in the morning, where your team has 5 minutes to give a presentation and then 10 minutes to have questions asked of them by at least 2 judges. If you want to learn more about team judging, you can check out one of the other presentations that we created, the judging presentation. After team judging, you'll have a driver's meeting. So a driver's meeting is when your team coach and 2 of your drivers go to a specified location, and the head referee sort of gives this spiel about all of the rules you got to follow, about gracious professionalism. And this is also your chance to ask any questions about either the game itself, about the referee and their leniency, etc. Now, during this period, teams will also be doing this thing called scouting. For many rookie teams, this might be sort of a new term, but scouting is when teams interview other teams and ask them questions about their robot and their robot's capabilities. Scouting is used later on when it comes time to select team alliances. Now, following the driver meeting, you'll have a bit of a ceremony, and then there'll be the robot games as a red or blue alliance partner. Now, these robot games are guaranteed to everyone. You'll have 5 robot games, and based upon your winning, you'll be entered into the alliance selection afterwards. Yeah. Next, you'll have, and also during these robot games, you don't get to choose your teammates. Next, you'll have pit visits in the afternoon by judges for specific awards. So if during your morning judging, the judges feel that you'd be a good fit for the Think Award or the Robot Design Award or the Collins Aerospace Innovate Award, they'll send some judges to visit you in the pit and ask more questions about your team and your robot, which are specified towards those awards. Number 6 is alliance selection and final matches. So this is some of the most exciting stuff that happens all day. During your robot games, each team will get a rank based on how many games they won and based on their tiebreaker points. And the top 4 teams will become alliance captains. These alliance captains will be able to choose either 1 or 2 more teams to join their alliance, depending on how the size of the tournament. And then these 4 alliances will compete in finals matches. First, you'll have your semifinals, where the first place ranked team will take on the fourth place ranked team. And the winning alliance from those two will take on the winner from the second place ranked team's alliance and third place ranked team's alliance. Those two will compete in the finals, and whoever wins the finals will be crowned the winning alliance. All of the semifinals and finals rounds are best of 3, and you'll end off with a closing and award ceremony. So an online event is quite different. You submit the robot runs before the tournament day through the first official portal. And what you'll be doing during these robot runs is giving an exact measurement of how many points you scored and how you scored those points. So there'll be an FTC score on the first official portal. You'll enter in, say that you dropped 5 balls during autonomous, that you dropped 7 balls during teleop, that you dropped 11 cubes during teleop, etc., etc. There's also the option to record these robot runs and post them on YouTube that many teams take in the spirit of solidarity for online tournaments and in the spirit of fairness. Team judging happens as a 15-minute session over Zoom or any other meeting app, depending on how your region organizes it. Judges will have another round of online interviews, which are kind of consistent with the pit interviews mentioned earlier, with teams for specific awards in the afternoon. For hybrid events, judging may happen online, but robot matches will be in person with team size and other restrictions. So during hybrid events, you'll still be judged online, but up to 3 of you or more, depending on the region, will be able to come in to a garage, to a gym and actually finish your robot rounds. The final award ceremony during hybrid events and during online events will be online. Now, thank you for listening through this presentation on tournament structure and the season timeline. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at drew575@gmail.com, and I'd love to answer them.